We're going to talk about the tribes and about government responsibility in telling their story, and kind of how that. The reason I can speak to that is because I have experience doing it. Before I was a professor here at UAFS, I was a park ranger and historian at Fort Smith National Historic Site from 1996 until 2004. And in 2004 is when I came over here to the campus. So there you go. But within that time period, one of the jobs that I had, being a park ranger is you do a lot of different things. You don't do the same thing every day. And while we were undertaking the reopening of the historic site after the tornado that occurred in 1998, and redoing exhibits and doing all kinds of renovations, and we had money to do things that the Park Service had never had before in Fort Smith. One of the things that was apparent was that we didn't have really, because Fort Smith has got such an important relationship with the Trail of Tears, we didn't have an exhibit that really talked about that. And we talked about it in programs, and we had a little bit of stuff inside the building, but nothing outside. So if visitors didn't pay the admission fee to come through the building, they didn't have any idea that this was a Trail of Tears site. So it was important to create some outdoor exhibit panels, these are fiberglass, and put them out in a location in the park. And they chose to do this down by the river, down below Bell Point where the original fort was, and until from 2000 until just this past year, that exhibit was in place, and then we had the flood, and now it's gone. And I was fortunate enough, after I worked there, the Park Service they use these for about 5 years, and the colors start fading because they're outside, and they replace them. And I happened to be able to nab a couple of the old ones because they were going to just get rid of them and recycle them. And I said I could use those in the classroom for teaching tools and things. And I'm going to tell you about this one. This one's kind of special to me. But I ended up getting these are the only ones that are left now. They've got images of the other ones, but they're gone. And they got wiped away by the flood. And I don't even know. I haven't talked to the superintendent down there. I don't know if they're thinking about putting it back together or not. But, huh?
The help of the tribes themselves.
They what now?
The tribes themselves are being kind of doing a partnership with trying to recreate.
Good deal. Yeah. Each one of the tribes got one of these. We'll talk about that in a second when we get over on that side of the board. So my responsibilities as a park ranger and historian, I was park ranger and historian, so I kind of had two hats. I did programs and tours. I worked the front desk. I was involved in daily operations there at the park. But then I had about three different duties, and they divided us up. There were 3 park rangers at the time, and they divided up all the different duties that needed to be done. And I was a historic weapons guy, so if you know me at all, you might see a picture of me or see a video of me shooting cannons or muskets. And I talk about that stuff a lot because that was something that I was in charge of. I was the volunteer coordinator, so I recruited people to help us at the park on a lot of different levels. And then the other thing I did, and this was to me one of the most important things that I probably did, other than keep people from getting blown up in demonstrations here, was I was the Section 106 coordinator for the park. And Section 106 is not something that a lot of people know about unless you work for the government or you're in historic preservation. But if you're in historic preservation, then you know about Section 106, because Section 106 is part of the Antiquities Act, and it's specifically how we conduct ourselves at historic sites. And it's kind of the guidelines of what is historic, what needs to be done there, what are the standards for preservation, and those kinds of issues. And then along with it, I ended up with another coordinator position that kind of branched into that, and that was NAGPRA. The government is typical with all the alphabet soup. That's what I call it. All the different acronyms. But NAGPRA is Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. That's what NAGPRA stands for. Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. And this is federal law that says now, and this was passed in the 90s. basically what it says is that, that a museum, an institution like a university, a part of the National Park Service, any of those entities that get federal funding on some level, if they are holding Native American goods, pottery, skeletons in the closet, that sounds kind of crazy, but that was going on. Burials had been dug up, and there were collections of bones in some museum collections of Native Americans. Some of them prehistoric, and some of them were historic. I mean, how would you like your ancestors' bones in somebody's closet in some museum, right? So I think we get the idea there. That's not hard to understand. So anyway, there's federal law now that those things have to be given back. So now when archaeologists are doing their work out there and they find burials, well, they got to figure out who these people are, as much as possible. Sometimes they can, and sometimes they can't figure out if they're tribally affiliated. If they're Cherokee, there's a connection to the Cherokee, or they're to somebody that's historic. Then there's all these laws that kick in to make sure that they get that back. If there's not anybody that claims it, then they deal with it a little bit differently. But NAGPRA goes along with this. Section 106 is about historic sites, and Section 106 is where we get the consultation and the discussion, including the tribes and what we do. And the other thing I think is kind of interesting is I left the Park Service in 2004. This is Secretary of the Interior's standards that were adopted during President Obama's administration, and this is dated 2011 at the bottom. Well, we had Section 106 and we had NAGPRA. We had these big, huge laws that we had to wade through and figure out what we were supposed to do with. And what they did during the Obama administration, they said, "Here's the deal. This is the essentials that you need to do here." And there was an executive order from the president down to the Department of Interior, Secretary of Interior, down to the National Park Service. It would have been nice to have had this when I was working for them because it's much more focused. Does that make sense? And we didn't have that. We were like all over the place trying to make sure we had covered all the bases. And after I left, they came back and did that. So I'm happy to tell you that the process is more streamlined today. So let's go back to the original idea. The original idea was the staff at Fort Smith National Historic Site wanted to do an exhibit on the Trail of Tears and tell that story. Okay? None of us on the staff were Native American. None of us on the staff had ancestors who were involved in the Trail of Tears. So it wasn't our story, it wasn't our personal story, but it's an American story. It's part of American history. It's part of the story of Fort Smith. So we have some authority there, but it's not a personal thing, right? So if you want to know what really happened, you need to talk to the people involved, right? And that's what we did. So what we did was we got with the tribes and we solicited participation. And the people that we started with were the historic preservation officers for the tribe. Each tribe has a historic preservation officer, a person in charge of documenting their history, of how their story is told, of verifying things, helping people with genealogy and verify that they have ancestry. Lots of different things. Exhibits. Most of the tribes have museums. Some of them have archives. All of those things fall under the historic preservation officer for the tribe. And they're the point of contact. So that's what we started with. And then we met with those people. And it was kind of interesting because the person that was in charge of this there were five panels, right? The 5 civilized tribes. We haven't used that phrase anymore, but the 5 tribes. So we did 5 panels for each of those Trail of Tears experiences that came through Fort Smith. And so we got to meet with 5 different groups. The person before me had gotten the Chickasaw, the Seminole, and the Choctaw panels completed. So I've got the Choctaw panel up here, and I had nothing to do with this one except continue through the process till we got all of them completed and had it actually fabricated. But the design, the graphic choices, the quotes, and the text for 3 of the panels were completed. And my task was to finish the Cherokee, which hadn't even been started yet, and then also to go back and talk to the Muscogee Creek Nation because they had attempted to work with them, and the Muscogee Creek Nation got kind of dissatisfied with Fort Smith and said, we're not going to do this. So I had to go and say, I'm sorry, I don't know where this got off the rails, but we need to get back on the rails here because we're going to have an exhibit, and 4 of the 5 tribes are going to be represented, and I think the Muscogee Creek Nation needs to be there too. They agreed. We sat down and started over, and we worked with the Muscogee Creek Nation to get them on board, and we did that. What's interesting though is the Muscogee Creek Nation, even if I had the panel here, they wrote their own text completely. They chose their own graphics completely. They didn't. It wasn't a cooperative thing. It wasn't a partnership. They said, we're going to do it. This is what it's going to be. And we were like, that's fine. We just wanted it done at that point. The Cherokee panel and the other 4 panels, this was a result of a process of give and take, discussions, pushback, input on both sides from the National Park Service and federal government view of things versus the tribal things. Does that make sense? And that's really kind of cool. It was neat to sit in a room and debate these issues and how the story is told and who it impacted and what words to use and some of that kind of stuff. We'll talk about that specifically in that exhibit in a minute. So then one of the things that we had to deal with was the approval process. Obviously, the National Park Service, which is part of the Department of Interior, which is part of the executive branch, which is part of the federal government of the United States, there's a complete hierarchy there, and you can just get your flow chart out and figure out who's in charge and who's going to approve stuff. That's not hard. With the tribes, it was a little bit different because each tribal organization has a little bit different structure. Sometimes the chief calls the shots. Sometimes the chief delegates to the historic preservation officer. Sometimes the chief delegates to a committee of educators and historians and trusted people in the tribe. It ran the gamut of different options there. So figuring out who the approval process had to go through was essential. So that brings us to, okay, so we're going to tell the story. So when I met with the Cherokee Nation, I met with their historic preservation officer. I said, okay, we need to do a panel. And I want you to know there's a couple of things here. There's a couple of aspects to this that are National Park Service standard. This panel, notice they all look alike to a degree. They all have a black band across the top. They all have the title of or the main topic. You know, in that case it's the Choctaw. In this case it's Indian removal in general. In this case it's the Cherokee. There's the Trail of Tears logo, which is a National Park Service logo through Department of Interior. That's on each panel in a certain spot. There's a small band at the bottom. That's standard. So you know, you take that template and go, here's what we got. Here's our canvas to work with. What we got to do is find some graphics that kind of catch the visitor's attention and tell your story in the same way. We have to write some text, but we can't write a book here. You know, we can't write 8,000 words and tell the story in all its detail, even though we would like to, even though that would probably help people understand it better. We have a limited space here, so we've got to get to the point. We've got to tell something that really grabs people, and then hopefully they'll go from this into the building and learn more, or go online, or go to an archives, or go to the library, or whatever. And that's the idea. These are not designed to tell the complete end-all story. They're designed to kind of get you started. So in that text and graphic choice, I talked to the Cherokee Nation, and I said, how do you want to handle this? And they said, well, it's your, you know, the Cherokee Nation was kind of interesting. They said, it's National Park Service exhibit. We were paying for it. They didn't feel compelled to demand that we let them write. They wanted to be a part of it. So they said, why don't you write a draft, and then let's talk about it. So that's what I did. I went back to my office and wrote a draft. And I drafted this text here. And it looked a lot different than what you see here today. And set up an appointment, went back, met with them. Here's my email to them. What do you think? Well, you know, you say this. We think it'd be better to stress this certain idea or that certain idea, or we like this word choice. It's the same kind of word, but it's a different word. And I'm just going to show you one of the phrases we put in here. Actually, I put it in there, and I didn't know if it would stick or not. First of all, I didn't know if my bosses would let me keep it in there. You know, I put internment camps on there. Okay, internment camp is like a concentration camp. You know what a concentration camp is? During the Trail of Tears, the federal government put people in concentration camps. They did not systematically gas them and shoot them like the Nazis did in World War II. So that people that they put in concentration camp. But you could argue that it was pretty ugly, and people died as a result of it. And you got to tell the truth. As ugly as that sounds, as difficult, as unwarm and fuzzy as that may be, you got to tell the truth. And at that time in the 90s, people in the federal government using phrases like this. It was like, we don't really want to go there. Today, we're a lot more open to that. I think we're a lot more open today in 20 years since then to hitting this stuff head on. But back then, it was like, somebody might be offended, so that might be, that's a little bit too heavy. But anyway, the tribe loved it. That's exactly what it was. Call it what it was. And that was helpful because they saw that we were trying to tell their story in a respectful way from their perspective, and not just the federal government's perspective. So word choices were a big issue. At that point, once we got some basic text here, I said, usually we have some quotes. So you'll see some people's pictures over there. Those guys are quoted. For the most part, there's some little quotes for each one of them. Sometimes we put the pictures of them, and sometimes we just put the quotes in. But it was valuable to get some first-hand perspective on these panels because quotes can do a lot for you in that regard. Somebody that saw it with their own eyes. And the historic preservation officer brought me Reverend Buttrick's journal. And Reverend Buttrick, this was what I think was really cool about this. Reverend Buttrick was not Native American. He was a white man who was a missionary with the Presbyterian Church. He traveled with the Cherokees and the Trail of Tears. So he saw what happened to them. He was not one of them, but he was with them. Does that make sense? I thought that's kind of cool because I identify with that. I want to tell this story. I want people to know it. I want people to understand it. I want people to remember it. It's not my story. It's a story I know. It's a story that's related to the United States, the country, and that I'm a citizen of. It's part of our collective history, but it's not my story. Does that make sense? It wasn't really Buttrick's story either, but he watched it, he witnessed it, he saw it. And when he says something like, they've been kept in a small spot, very much like you keep animals in, exposed to the wind and the rain, and herded together like droves of hogs, he says, the federal government's treating these Cherokee like hogs out here. Hogs probably get treated better in some places than the Cherokees got treated. That's pretty powerful stuff. So that's where the quotes come from. This is Buttrick again. This is Buttrick again, and he's talking about all the people who died and people that were dying along the route from Georgia all the way through Arkansas and over here to Indian Territory, which is now the state of Oklahoma. So those are some of the issues that came with it. The next thing that once we got the text worked out, then we needed to choose the graphics. Both of these paintings were done by the same artist. She was a highly respected and recommended artist she's Cherokee herself. So this is a Cherokee artist's view of what's going on here. And this is a picture of Cherokees at their home when the troops show up to forcibly move them and make them leave. Can you imagine what it would be like if somebody walked up to your door, if the military rolled up in a Humvee at your house today and said, you've got 2 weeks to pack your stuff and go. And if you don't, we're going to come make you do it at gunpoint. But that's not too good. You would want to defend your property. You would want to defend your family. That's what this picture, this image kind of portrays. The other image speaks to the death of the Trail of Tears. And what I learned during this process was the imagery behind this picture right here. To the Cherokee, the owl is the symbol of death. So these people are on the back of the owl as the owl is flying. But that's symbolic of death for the Cherokee. It has great meaning in their religion, tribal religion, and their beliefs. What was interesting though is I had a caption for this because I said he traveled with us and called many by name. That's the name of the picture. He traveled with us, the owl, and called many by name. When the owl calls your name, you're done. You're gone. I wanted to explain that though, because people might not get that, right? I've already explained it to you. Now you get it. If I just said if I gave you the title and showed you the picture, you probably wouldn't get it, right? You might, but you might not. I wanted people to understand that. So I had a caption that explained the owl is the symbol of death of the Cherokee, blah blah blah, and the chief of Cherokee. I don't think so. I don't want to capture it. He said, it is what that means. He understood where I was going with it. But he said, I don't think so. So the chief of Cherokee said, take the caption off. He said, if they can't figure it out, they don't need to know. That's how he felt about it. I mean, so it's not on there. The historian, the educator in me, the professor, that person wants to explain, wants to help you connect to it. But the chief was like, yeah, we've gone far enough here. That's good enough. And that was that. So it got left out, and that was their choice. So we completed the Cherokee panel. At the same time, I was working with the Muscogee Creek Nation. They were writing their own text. They were choosing their own graphics. And I think I can show you an image of their panel in just a minute. And then the other thing we had to do was we met with them individually on each of the 5 panels. And things like tribal politics came into play there. Because sometimes the chief came up for re-election, and we started with one chief and another chief came in. Then we had to go back and start over, but we had to explain, this is where we are in this process, this is what the tribe has recommended and wants so far. Are you still going to want those things, or are you going to want to do this differently? We had to be prepared for that. Luckily, we didn't have to go back to square one. We had meetings with the individuals, historic preservation officers, and sometimes we met with the tribal council, which was representatives of all the tribes, to get this accomplished. And then once we got it completed, we worked on a panel that was an orientation panel for the big picture. Because I've got this up here. Their stories were somewhat the same, yet they were unique. The Cherokee experience is similar to the Choctaws experience. They got moved by the federal government by force. They lost their property and their land, their tribal sovereignty. They were packed up and moved halfway across the country to a new location. They experienced death and suffering. They have a lot of things in common, right? But the Choctaws speak a different language than the Cherokees. They come from a different part of the country. They have different life ways. They have different culture. Their tribal religion and things that they believe are different. There's similarities, but there's differences. And you can't put all Native Americans in one box and say, okay, these are all Native Americans and they're all the same. They're very different, very complex. And you start doing that, and you're going to have trouble. That would be a problem. It would be treating them all the same. Yeah, we still had to kind of come to grips with, we got to agree on how the biggest part of the story is told, because federal Indian policy and Indian removal was something that affected all of them. It affected all of them differently, but it also affected all of them similarly as well. So that's where this came from. And this is kind of interesting too, because once we got this put together and we got this out there, and again, these panels were out there at one time, and they were on display for about 5 years, but they pulled them off once they started fading and everything, and they replaced them with nice new ones. The colors were much clearer. But when we replaced this one the first time after 5 years, and I was still there at that time, the tribes had decided that they didn't like this image anymore. The tribal council met, and they didn't like this image that was on the main orientation panel. And their argument for that was that it looked like everybody's going off to a picnic or to like go tailgating or something. It looked like everybody's going off to a football game. They're kind of, it's not devastating. Or it looks like these people are headed to California. They're like, they've got their farm animals and stuff. They're just going to go to California. They wanted a portrayal of the trail to be more destitute, more graphic, more tragic, more ugly. And we found another artist rendition of this kind of picture here of the overland route that did that, and it got changed. But this was the original choice here that was later changed at the wishes of the tribal council. The tribal council is the 5 tribes have a tribal council. So I went to Muscogee for the first one that I attended, and it was in a massive banquet hall. It was at Macomb College over there in one of their big buildings. And so all the chiefs were there from each of the tribes, all the deputy chiefs, all the hierarchy all the way down. And I'm this little park ranger right around there with my smoking bear hat on, what I do. But it was really cool, and I got introduced to all the chiefs, and they explained. I got to explain what I was trying to do, what I was trying to accomplish, and that I'm just a white boy from Fort Smith. This is my job, and it worked. We were able to get it accomplished. So you can come up and look at these in a minute when we totally finish. But once we got them completed, they built an overlook area, and I'm going to show you some. I can't show you pictures. So Oh, I want to show you some other things. But yeah, I'll show you. So, down. This picture here, this shows you the panels over here on the right side. These are the panels. That's 4 of them right there. And right over in this area, if you extended the photograph a little further where the arrow is here, would be the other panel. So the 5 panels were there. And then back here, before you walked up to the individual tribal panels, there was the panel that's down here in the chair that kind of gave you the orientation to the whole thing. And it was out there on the edge of the river at Bell Point, so you were overlooking the river. The panels reference the fact that the tribes all traveled on the Trail of Tears, some over land and some by water. The river routes were part of it too. So that's what's going on with those. Here's a picture of visitors looking at that kind of from their perspective. Here's the devastation of that area today. It's gone. It's like totally got wiped out by the flood. There's a up close of there's the Choctaw panel that I've got over there on the left side of the board. There's one of them in place right there. There's the Muscogee Creek panel and how it turned out. You can kind of blow this up a little bit and see a little bit better. So there's the Muscogee Creek panel, and we used 3 quotes at the bottom, 3 different chiefs or tribal elders. There was a picture that was done by a Muscogee Creek artist. To do that. That was something else too. I think part of the reason that the Muscogee Creek Nation got mad was the Park Service started off with the draft panel the first time, and it said the Creek Nation on it. Anybody know what might be wrong with that? The Creek name for those people is the white man's name for those people. That's where it got started off the rails from the beginning. They're like, oh, you're going to call us the white man's name, because they call themselves the Muscogee people. And they usually hyphenate Creek in there because that's commonly what they're known as, but that's not really their name. They're the Muscogee people. All right? Stuff like that you run into. This is how it gets complex. You either learn these lessons sometimes the hard way, and sometimes you do it through experience, but it's stuff that you've got to learn and you have to navigate. So, here's some of the other. There's a little bit closer image of that Muscogee Creek panel. You kind of see how it's there. You can this is all on the web too, by the way. So you can Google Trail of Tears Scenic Overlook, of course, the National Historic Site. These images will pop up. You can go back and look at it. So that's kind of the gist of what we were getting accomplished there and everything. I wanted to explain a little bit more about 106 while I have you here, because the 106 idea is part of the National Historic Preservation Act, Section 106 of it. It's concerned with federal undertakings. Creating an exhibit about Native Americans is an undertaking. Digging water lines at the historic site is an undertaking. Doing archaeology at the First Fort site is an undertaking. They're all the same thing. See that? And anybody that has a vested interest in that needs to be consulted, especially if it's tribal. So if the federal government is undertaking a project, activity, program that's funded, permitted, licensed, or approved by a federal agency, in this case it's the National Park Service, or on federal property, then these things kick in. What does it require? It requires the agencies to take into account the effects of their undertakings. It requires them to consult with interested parties about those, especially historic properties. But you'll see here it says tribal historic preservation offices, Indian tribes, including Alaskan Natives, Hawaiian organizations also. All of those are included in the consultation process. So even though we weren't digging something up, even though we weren't moving water lines, impacting a site that was related to the Trail of Tears, because we were telling this story, it was a program, it was an exhibit, they had to be consulted. See how that works? And that's kind of the point I wanted to make with that aspect of it. Participation was kind of interesting. The approval process was kind of interesting. The text and graphic discussions, most of the time they weren't heated, but there was some pushback at times. We would, the National Park Service, and I would say, this is what we know about this story. We would say this, and they would go, well, we believe something different. And the Muscogee Creek Nation, we finally just said, we're just not going to argue about this, but there were some things that they told really from their perspective. I think the best way to understand the events in the past is to bring as many perspectives in as possible. I think you need to hear from the victims and the people that carried the policies out and understand what both of them experienced, and then you can sit back and go, hey, this is what that was all about. When you're on one of those sides or the other, you kind of are focused on your story, and that's a little more difficult to do at times. So that's what we got here. I don't know how much time I'm supposed to have here. I think I'll just open it up for questions at this point, because this is pretty much what I wanted to discuss. I've got to do some really interesting things in my career. Dennis Scott is a really cool, interesting story, and there's other things I've been involved in. But when I look back at my career and some of the things that I had to do and was tasked with doing, this consultation work was some of the most rewarding work that I did. And when I left the Park Service in 2004 to come over to UA Fort Smith full time, I had the representatives of these tribes that I had worked with on this exhibit. They were all at my going away party, and that was really cool. I mean, they remembered, and all I try to do is give them a fair shake, give them, treat them like you would want to be treated, and let's sit down and partner and tell this story in a way we can all understand it better and see how deep it goes. And I've still got friends from that process that I have been. I'm very proud of that, because that can go other way. So, got any questions? Do what? They did, yeah. And she's retired now. Joyce Bear was she was the historian. The Muscogee Creek Nation, they had a historic preservation officer, but he dealt with only land and stuff. So he was like totally out of the history side of things, and they deferred. She was like an archivist, museum, and education person for the tribe, historian. And so they dumped it on her, and she and I got to be really good friends. And I went to Muscogee a few times. She took me to a barbecue place that I didn't even know existed, Slicks, and I was like, this is awesome. And they served me on paper towel. Get your barbecue sandwich on a paper towel. One of those kind of places. But it was like, it was awesome. It was a process, but I wasn't the guy that got it off the rail. I was the guy trying to get it back on. And that was helpful too. So they didn't see me as the problem. They saw me as somebody trying to make it right and get a solution. So it worked out real well. Yes.
Were you able to go to the actual sites where they began to look?
No, I wish the Park Service would have let me do that. Because I was a student of history. I've been a history teacher before I worked for the Park Service, so I knew where the Trail of Tears started. I had to do some primary research and dig into these individual stories to know more specifically. Like, the Choctaw were in Mississippi. The Muscogee Creek Nation are out of Alabama. The Seminoles are out of Florida. The Seminoles are their Trail of Tears story. I wish I could show you the panel. Their Trail of Tears story is unique because they were in the Florida Everglades. They fought a war with the federal government. They refused to come. They did not sign treaties. The federal government finally chained the leaders of the Seminole Nation to ships, brought them across the Gulf of Mexico, up the Mississippi, up the Arkansas, right past Fort Smith, and they dumped them out over there in the Seminole Nation. And they said, "Get off the boat. This is your land now, and shut up." That's what they did. And it's a totally different story than a treaty that was signed and this process that the Cherokees went through. Does that make sense? They're all dealing with the federal government and they're all dealing with the same end result, but how they got there and the details were different. So I wish I could have gone to each place like that, but I had to learn as much as I could. I got to tell you, when I sat down with the Historic Preservation Officer for the Seminole Nation, we already had the panel done, but I got to meet him and talk to him and his wife at the Intertribal Council meeting. His wife leaned over the table. She goes, "You from Fort Smith?" I said, "Uh-huh." She said, "I grew up in Seminole, Oklahoma." She goes, "We used to drive to Fort Smith to buy stuff at the stores and stuff." I said, "Yeah." I said, "My mom and dad." She goes, "My mom and dad would not let us out of the car." I said, "Really?" I said, "Why?" She goes, "We were afraid of white people in Fort Smith. We were told it was a really mean, bad place." I think that was years of Judge Parker and the hangings and all of that stuff. I think the reputation of Fort Smith was worse than what Fort Smith really was. But she said she was never allowed to walk the streets of downtown Fort Smith while her mom was shopping and all that kind of stuff. She said, "We just stay in the car. We were out in the car all the way over here, then we'd ride back halfway to the Seminole and eat somewhere." And I was like, it made me feel bad. I was like, Fort Smith's a nicer place than that. I wish somebody would have reached out to you. But that's the story she told me about her upbringing.
Since your mom would fear and see it.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, maybe it was just easier to keep in the car. I don't know. But she told me that story. I thought it was kind of interesting. Stuff like that came out too. They go, "Oh, you're from Fort Smith?" Tuesday. Anything else? Yes.
You may have covered this before, Mr. Wayne, and I apologize for being late.
No problem.
To have class. And my question was the panels. What's the discussion or the construction of the panels now?
Well, Shelley was telling me that she's been in contact with somebody at the park, and they're working with the tribes to replicate this or put it back. What I don't know is, I mean, you have trouble finding decent photographs of them. The Park Service has got this one. They have like a high-res scan of this one, and I saw a high-res scan of the Choctaw on Fort Smith National Historic Site's websites. But I already had those in the room, so I didn't feel compelled to put them up on the screen for you. But I couldn't find any of the others except for people's photographs that they put up on the internet.
Sure.
So the record of these is kind of gone. I would imagine there's an electronic file somewhere. We sent these to a company that fabricated these and turned them. And that company was in West Virginia. That company's still in business. They make wayside panels for museums across the country. So, you know, chances are they still got some of that stuff. But I don't know what the process will be. And they may want to change it. You know, it's kind of dated at this point.
Yeah.
That was what I gathered.
You know,
Well, there's
they
some,
may want to update it. They may want to change the wordings. They may want to change the
some
graphics.
question of maybe it wasn't enough and that people were wanting more than just some panels.
Yeah. And I do know this. After I left the Park Service in 2004
Right.
and came over here to the university, one of the things that they did pretty quickly after I left was they added the Osage. They added a panel for the Osage out there because the Osage weren't on the Trail of Tears. They were here.
Yeah.
And the Osage lands partially were taken from them, and the Cherokees and some of these other groups were dumped onto their lands. Does that make sense? So the Osage lost out too, even though they didn't come on the Trail of Tears. So there was an Osage panel out there that I had nothing to do with, but they went back and negotiated with the Osage Nation, which I think is kind of cool because that's more of the story. And these tribes suffered greatly by being relocated from where they were originally. The Osage were already here, and they were impacted by all these new people coming in and competing with them for resources and land. And they got into warfare over it also. There was fighting and violence that came from it. So.
What about Drennan Scott? Are you telling more of this story?
We have, I have negotiated with I've talked to the National Historic Trail of Tears, Long Distance Trails Office, and they initially said that John Drennan was Choctaw agent, but he was outside. They picked a year span to concentrate on the Trail of Tears, and they had to put a date, wrap it around a certain day.
Sure.
John Drennan's time was outside of that day. Even though he was Choctaw agent, it was after the significant part of the Trail of Tears. And the Long Distance Trails Office answer to me was, you're a few years late because Drennan's kind of coming. He's dealing with the effects of the Trail of Tears, but he's not really dealing with the trail. So they put me off and said, no, I don't think so. We were wanting an exhibit panel there, one of these style exhibits. The Trail of Tears Association from Arkansas, which Dusty, who came and spoke here a week ago, he's a part of, they went back to the Long Distance Trails office and said, yeah, maybe Drennan's time as Indian agent doesn't qualify, but that house was sitting there when all these tribes went through by the river. So they could see John Drennan's house up there on the hill when they went by on the river trail. So it's a witness to the trail too. So we've re-established negotiations. We haven't done much work on it yet, but it sounds like we may get an exhibit yet, and that's through the Trail of Tears Association pushing the Park Service and saying, hey, the Drennan House was a witness to the river route on the Trail of Tears. It was sitting there when they came through in '38, and that's coming. So maybe we'll have that eventually. We've discussed because Drennan was an agent. Drennan was also superintendent over the agents in terms of the five tribes at that point. So he had effects not only just the Choctaw, but also the Cherokees and the other groups too. So and I've discussed that with especially the Historic Preservation Officer of the Cherokee Nation and others at times. So I think it's something that we'll eventually have. It's just, there's always more work to do.
Did they meet there? Or was he?
He did work, as Choctaw agent, he did work out of his office at the house. So tribal representatives, people getting contracts to do things in the Choctaw Nation came and signed that paperwork at his house. Yeah, that's documented. Which is kind of cool. We found Tim Mulvihill found a piece of trade silver, which is Native American. It's a pendant about that big, and it's got it looks like a design from Spyro for some of the pottery. It's a spider, and it's the legs of a spider, and they've been tapped into this piece of silver, and it's got a hole in it so you can string it and wear it around your neck. It may have been a coin, or it may have been a piece of money, or it may just have been valuable. But it's a Native American good. We found it out by the kitchen. So somebody dropped it, or it fell off something. How it got there, we don't really know. We have some prehistoric lithics underneath all that stuff too. So we know during the Mississippian period, people were on that bluff where John Drennan's house was. And that's the same thing at Bell Point. Long before all this history happens, you've got the Mississippian folks that were building Spyro and other places. They were here, and some of them are ancestral to the Caddo and the Quapaw and the Wichita, and some of them, and the Osage. Those are ancestral to some of those groups of people. Yep. Any other questions? Well, this has been my pleasure talking to y'all. Thank you for coming.